41% of Austrian men are overweight. In other words, they have a BMI of over 25. 18% are even morbidly obese, so they have a BMI of over 30. For all women, it looks a bit better, but still worrying. We have 27% who have a BMI of more than 25. And ultimately, 15% are still morbidly obese, with a BMI of over 30. But this is not just an Austrian phenomenon. Almost a third of the world's population is currently overweight. The trend does not look any better. By 2035, almost half of the world's population, or perhaps even more, will be overweight. This already costs the global healthcare system around $2 trillion a year. By 2035, this is expected to increase to as many as 4.3 million, with even more dramatic figures in some countries. For example, American Samoa, a small island country in Oceania, has over 75% of its people who are overweight. So one of the big problems of our time, you could say, especially when we consider that morbid obesity, overweight, has a number of consequences for the body, which benefit major lifestyle diseases of our time, such as cardiovascular disease, but also an increased risk of cancer, diabetes, of course, and neurocerebral diseases such as the various forms of dementia, which are also on the rise, and many other things. However, many people not only have a health problem when they think about how to get in the best possible shape to reach the age of 100. For many, it is also an aesthetic issue or an issue of well-being. We want to like what we see in the mirror. We might just want to be more energetic, more productive. And there are many answers to this big question. The fitness industry, the health industry, including the pharmaceutical industry, has a great many answers here. Many of them are very promising, but only a few are true. We live in a time with plenty of various health offers, fitness offers, especially when it comes to the perfect look, the dream weight. The fitness industry is full of seemingly perfect offers. What is really evidence-based, health-promoting, and has a targeted path to the long-term goal, and what is just an empty marketing promise and perhaps even hazardous to health is hardly transparent for most of us. Even if we deal with these topics on a regular basis, when we are experts, even then it is not that easy to see through all of this immediately. And that is exactly why I would like to give an overview here today. Because where would the classic approaches be if we talk about losing weight properly, efficiently, sustainably, without risk to health? There are usually two initial starting points. One is nutrition, the other is movement. But there is much more. There are a plethora of influencing factors, evidence-based factors for body weight, for the constitution of the body, for the proportion of adipose tissue, the proportion of muscle mass, for the entire composition. And from all these influencing factors such as sleep, environmental conditions such as heat and cold, especially the immune system, the microbiome, we have a wealth of options, not just nutrition or exercise, even though these are of course the central topics in terms of the end result. Many people here have the approach of focusing extremely on one topic, such as nutrition. How many opportunities do I have to consume more protein or to save a few calories here and there? How much vitamin C is in an orange or in a grapefruit, and which would be the better fruit in this case? I can tell you though that it's comparable to the approach of a student who maybe has a B in math. who is studying day and night to get straight A's, but in 4 other subjects has an F. And in this case, probably none of us would recommend that the student focus so much on mathematics, where he already has a B, but rather that he should perhaps try to make it through the year in all subjects and not have to repeat the year. Sounds logical. But for many of us, when it comes to weight loss or health and fitness goals, this is exactly the approach. We focus extremely on nutrition or extremely on exercise, but leave many other areas out. Accordingly, one should try to fulfill the basics in all these areas. Get the basics right first, and then perhaps concentrate more on the details in the individual areas. And it is precisely this holistic approach that I would like to talk to you about today. And of course, there is always the question of whether it is even within our control. What percentage? How much of our fitness, our health, our constitution is actually up to us? And I have good news for you. It is actually up to us. We have 20% genetic factors and 80% lifestyle. Of course, some of us have better cards, some have worse cards when it comes to the 20%. But 80% means that we can still hold the majority ourselves. Incidentally, this is not a classic Pareto principle. It is pure coincidence that you also have 80-20 here. One could even claim, and this is also very well documented at present, that we also have the 20% in a sense through 3 corners of influence when we consider epigenetic processes. This means that by adopting a health-promoting lifestyle, we can also ensure that those genes that are perhaps very good for us, to use them to a greater extent, and those that are perhaps not so well disposed towards us. Conversely, by a lifestyle that is harmful to health, such as smoking or excessive alcohol consumption. To explain this in detail would, however, go far beyond the scope of this talk. That's why we'll leave it at the fact that we definitely have these things in our own hands. There's no getting around that. Where should you start, and how can it be that even small changes are not that easy, that we will never eat another fried meal again from one day to the next? There is only more broccoli and salad. We all quit smoking immediately, and from now on, like every day before breakfast, we went for a run at 5 o'clock in the morning. It could be difficult for most of us, if not perhaps even for all of us. I can reassure you, even small changes, bit by bit, bring about enormous progress. And the author, James Clear, who has written a very exciting book about this, Forming Habits, illustrates this quite well in graphic form. And that is that these small changes not only add up step by step, but also multiply. And so, with a few small changes and adjustments, we can achieve a great deal. This applies to many things in life, but especially when it comes to our health, our dream weight, and our dream body. But at the end of the day, the central topic is and remains, despite various marketing promises from the fitness industry. Do you consume more than you produce or not? Or to put it in even more detail, do we take in more calories than we burn or not? Do we take in more? Will we store the weight? Would we store these calories in the form of adipose tissue? The result is familiar to many of us. Do we burn more than we take into our bodies? We lose weight because the whole thing, of course, somehow has to be compensated, this deficit. And the conclusion seems quite simple. Just eat less or eat nothing at all. And then, of course, the less we eat and the more we exercise, the faster we can starve ourselves to our dream figure. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite work that way. There is a clear limit, which we can also express in figures. That is 800 kilocalories per day. If you eat more than 800 calories too few, that is, have a deficit of more than 800 calories, then the body switches to a kind of energy-saving mode, a kind of emergency program in which it tries to slow down because it expects a period of famine to save the energy reserves, that is our adipose tissue, for this period of hunger, because it does not know when there will be food again. But somehow it has to meet the demand, and so it first burns skin cells of the connective tissue and of course the musculature that ensures that we can burn calories at all, among other things. Of course, every organ, such as the brain and all the others, also consume calories, but the muscles need the most, of course. And that's where we also have the greatest influence on energy needs. What happens next is clear. If I starve myself further and further down with a deficit that is too large, with far more than 800 kilocalories per day, then the body will eventually hardly have more muscle mass, and when I have reached my dream weight or have achieved my dream figure, and then everything is back to normal, then there is much less demand for much less energy. That means I have a lot fewer calories that I need each day, and then maybe I can starve myself down from 90 to 80 kilos, but then I'll be back up to 95 in no time. Because there is less muscle mass. This not only explains the famous yo-yo effect, but also that muscle tissue is extremely important and that the whole process cannot happen overnight. 1 gram of fat has 9 kilocalories, so we can calculate how much that is. For example, let's say we want to lose 10 kilos of fat. That's 90,000 kilocalories. It takes a while. How can we approach it? When we look at the energy balance in the center, we have a wealth of influencing factors, but they cannot be considered in isolation. In the human body, an absolutely fascinating work of Mother Nature, everything is connected to everything else. And so, for example, the metabolism affects our nervous system, our psyche. Heat and cold, for example, also affect our muscle tissue and our fatty tissue. The topic of network trusses is particularly relevant. We will come to that in a moment. We have an enormous influence between the immune system, microbiome, sleep, light. Above all, sleep and light are closely related. The metabolism of the muscles, the adipose tissue, all these things affect each other, but also our energy balance. And in the end, this also affects all these individual areas again. And of course, I don't have all the things that were listed earlier here on this slightly smaller slide. I only listed a handful of them here. The central mechanisms that I would like to talk to you about, and I would very much like to start with the microbiome. A thing that is in itself incredibly fascinating when you consider that there are more cells in and on the human body than, there are more bacteria than human cells. We actually have more bacteria in us than the body's own cells. Of course, it is clear that when we look at these little roommates and have a positive influence on them, they also do us good there. And if we don't take care of them, they won't look after us so well either. Why does it have such a big influence, or how does it work? And why, for example, do we say that the gut is such an essential topic? Why the gut? Why not the liver or lungs when it comes to microbiomes? This is partly because the largest microbiome is that in the gut, and that is also where the greatest diversity exists. And if we look at the intestinal wall, for example, the tissue that makes up the intestine, then it consists of so-called small epithelial cells that dock onto each other and are connected by such small openings. These are called tight junctions. And when I look at what is going on in the intestines, there are a lot of bacteria and some viruses in our intestines. Not all of them are bad, metabolizing what comes from food, among other things, and then making it all available to our body through the intestinal wall into the bloodstream. And if we have very good colonization of our intestines, then it gets a lot of the nutrients from the food that are good for us. The intestinal wall then opens, the good things come in, the intestinal wall closes, and a large part of the remaining stool is then simply excreted. But if we have poor gut colonization, if we can simplify it a bit, these intestinal bacteria, these bad guys, are not just capable of producing toxins and substances that are generally not good for our body. They also have the tendency to get a lot more out of food than the good ones. This means that on the one hand, more is taken in and less is excreted. Then we actually consume more calories. We take in the same amount of calories in our body, but with a good intestinal microbiome, we are not doing the body any good by not allowing any toxins in, but we also excrete more calories. This means that we can already save a little bit there alone. And of course, these toxins also cause the intestinal barrier to become inflamed, to become fatty and then impermeable, and that leads to everything getting into the body all the time. All kinds of toxins, all kinds of things that we don't actually want in there. And that brings another system into play. The next one in our control loop, the immune system. And even if the human brain is probably the greatest miracle in the universe, then the immune system is nevertheless always the central system of the body in case of doubt. In a healthy brain, the brain has more energy during the day and the immune system at night. But if we have an infection or a form like chronic inflammation of the bowel, then the immune system is active all the time. Then it always gets the first priority. And that is mainly because most people, ever since there have been people, so over several 100,000 years, did not die from the saber-toothed tiger, not from the Ice Age, not from hunger, but from infections, from infectious diseases. And accordingly, because we are now such a well-adapted species, as is well known, the fittest survive. We are hardly adapted to anything as well as to avoiding infections, or above all, avoiding short-term death from infection. We subordinate everything to it. This means that when in doubt, we always give the immune system the majority of the energy when there is such a problem. And if, for example, this intestinal barrier is chronically open and things keep getting in that shouldn't, the immune system is permanently active and perhaps permanently overburdened. And there is hardly anything that consumes as much energy as an active immune system. With the exception of the muscles, of course. And this active immune system, which initially gets all the energy, ensures that all the other organs get too little. They share the leftovers, like the brain, which then, of course, with less energy, is far less resistant to stress. Or the liver, which plays a fundamental role in the metabolism. And, of course, a heart that is supposed to beat for 100 years without a break. And they all get too little energy. This means that if we manage to get our immune system under control, we are also well placed to change our body. This is mainly because, of course, the brain needs energy to change habits. If I do things differently today than I did yesterday, then a plastic change actually happens in the brain. But for this to be possible, I need enough energy in the brain. And chronic inflammation is never a good thing, regardless. What about the psyche, the nervous system? Stress is the cause. It doesn't just ensure that our body feels that it needs more energy because we are experiencing a dangerous situation and somehow have to meet this additional energy demand, which can then end in ravenous hunger attacks or a disturbed metabolism, for example. The classic number one stress hormone, cortisol, is also the hormone that is also primarily responsible for deactivating the immune system. But if we constantly have high cortisol levels, then at some point the immune system gets used to these high cortisol levels and becomes cortisol resistant, so to speak. This is similar to insulin resistance in type 2 diabetes. So we have no way of activating this immune system anymore, and thus constantly low immune activity, constantly too little energy for our muscles to be active too. We have too little energy in our brains, we have no drive, no motivation. That means going out and going for a run and tackling new things becomes much, much more difficult. It becomes much more difficult to change our habits under these conditions. This means that if we really want to change, if we want to quit smoking, if we want to try to get more exercise, if we want to pay more attention to our diet, then we need an inflammation-free body. We need a body without constant immune activity. And of course, the relationship between stress, mental health, and the immune system is a very, very important one. That's exactly how it is, especially when it comes to heat and cold. So hormetic stimuli, that's a kind of natural interpretation of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So a stimulus that would generally be considered intense, unhealthy, or deadly for humans, such as 90 degrees. But under a certain dose, i.e. a maximum stay of 10 to 15 minutes, a sauna at 90 degrees can be very beneficial for your health. It is similar with cold, for example. And cold is such a super exciting topic in itself because it helps us to remodel our adipose tissue. We don't just have one type of fat, like this classic belly fat that we often, or perhaps just often, consider to be very inappropriate, which is also referred to in science as white fat. We have another, the brown fat, and the two couldn't be more different. Brown fat is actually anti-inflammatory, so it produces a lot of anti-inflammatory hormones, helps generate additional body heat, and burns additional calories in the process. The white adipose tissue is simply inflammatory and consumes little energy, consumes no energy at all. However, we have a good mechanism for turning white fat into brown fat using cold. And for that, we can take an ice bath or a cold shower, for example. And I know that this is often the point at which many people are less than pleased because it's no fun at the very beginning. But you can approach it step by step, sometimes cool, then colder, then colder, then colder, and longer. But you can also just go out for a walk in 15-degree weather, wearing shorts, a swimsuit, maybe a pair of slippers. This also has similar effects to ice bathing, like a cold shower. And so we can just, by going out a bit in the winter or even use a cold shower, actually burn additional fat because we have to generate this heat. But on the other hand, also give our body something anti-inflammatory, something that is beneficial in the long term and ensures that more and more energy can be burned afterwards in the long term because brown adipose tissue simply burns energy. Of course, the factor of movement is also elemental, and it is precisely here that we can exert an enormous influence because, of course, you can simply burn more and more. But the point is that, as I said, we need muscle mass. So just the endurance training, which is a great thing, I don't want to deny that, on its own isn't enough either. In any case, strength training should be included because, of course, we need strong muscles. And maybe big muscles too. The bigger and more powerful a muscle is, the more energy it burns. And here too, there is another factor to consider. A muscle is one of the most hormonally active organs in the body. There is hardly any other tissue in the body, including the brain, liver, adrenal glands, etc., that produces nearly as many hormones as the musculature as a whole. And all the hormones that the musculature produces are anti-inflammatory. So let's make sure that we can regulate our immune system well so that the brain is supplied with sufficient energy so that you can really get things done. And of course, this musculature also helps us to burn additional energy. Of course, the muscles also have the advantage that they absorb a lot of blood sugar from the bloodstream through physical activity, which means that we do not have such high insulin spikes. Incidentally, insulin is the hormone that activates the immune system like no other. Of course, this also means that if we eat all the time, we have inflammation all the time. Just as a precaution in case any of the food or liquid should be contaminated. And that is precisely why we can also do something about the frequency of meals. It is not just about the choice of food. A webinar, workshop, or lecture lasting several hours could be held on this topic alone, but that is beyond the scope of this talk. Simply eating a maximum of 21 times a week and maybe going for a period of time without eating in between is a great recommendation to simply optimize the metabolism, to make the metabolism more sensitive, so to speak, to the various hormones such as insulin. This alone can do our brain, our immune system, but also at the end of the day, our body composition a great deal of good. And of course, sleep is ultimately a crucial factor for us. Sleep is a very, very important topic because, on the one hand, the immune system is active at night, and if you don't sleep well or get too little sleep, then the immune system has to do it for hours during the day. On the other hand, even during sleep, a lot of metabolic processes are optimized and continued. This means that if we sleep poorly or too little, this has a huge impact on our blood sugar levels, our metabolism, and our appetite the next day. This means that when it comes to losing weight, the recommendation for someone who sleeps very poorly or chronically gets too little sleep or perhaps works shifts does not necessarily have to be a dietary recommendation or a recommendation to exercise. It can also be the recommendation to simply sleep 8 hours a night and at the same times if possible. And light can also be an important factor. For example, we consume an enormous amount of red light during the day. Consume an enormous amount of blue light, which ensures that we are very alert and motivated during the day. It is rather unfavorable in the evening because it is nighttime. Soon it will be nighttime and we sleep. Then we need a lot of energy in our brain. This is when we want to relax, when we want to wind down, and when we should perhaps consume red light, i.e. sunsets, in advance. This is also the reason why it is considered pleasant and relaxing. Blue light in the evening would be completely counterproductive, especially from screens such as cell phones, tablets, televisions, laptops in particular have the stimulus "it's daytime, be awake, be alert," and would thus disturb our sleep. Even by waking up properly, we can optimize the quality of the night before. For example, you can use a light alarm clock for this purpose, which has a very significant influence on how we end the sleep rhythm, properly complete the last sleep cycle, and thus start the coming day much better. If we summarize, then there are of course always ingenious products in the fitness industry, in the healthcare sector. I'm not saying it is bad, it's not all bad, but it shouldn't be the basis. The basis should be a healthy, evolutionary lifestyle. During the day you are awake, at night you sleep. Sometimes it's cold, sometimes it's hot. You don't always need heating or air conditioning. One has not always something to eat. You may only eat 3 times a day. You move, you are relaxed from time to time. Sometimes you are more active, sometimes you take it a bit easier. And that's where the real basis is created for health goals of all kinds, including losing weight. And not just losing weight in general, but in particular also the health promoting lifestyle itself. I hope you found some exciting things and I wish you all the best. Stick with the move days and good luck with your fitness goals. Thank you. Take care.